Hello and welcome along to Wired Foresight. I'm Greg Williams, Editor-in-Chief of Wired. Today's session is part of an ongoing series of conversations with leading figures and innovative thinkers in business, science, technology, academia and policy to really investigate the fast-paced changes the world is currently undergoing, to explore how the world will be shaped in the coming months and years, and most importantly, to try and understand how we can prepare for these changes. We intend that our live virtual briefings are punchy. They're top-level sessions with a guest speaker on a key topic or theme. Each starts with a brief introduction from the speaker, goes into discussion with the editor, and is followed by a Q&A session featuring your questions. We know you're busy, and we know that you want concise, authoritative briefings, so these discussions will last no longer than 25 minutes. A couple of important points: you can submit your questions throughout the session by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. As with all of Wired's virtual briefings, today's session is produced by the Wired events team. Finally, this session is being recorded and we will gladly send you a copy of the link afterwards if you'd like us to do so. Now onto the session. Today we explore how technology has shaped humanity and what's to come when we develop technologies beyond our programmable control. With AI developing at a rapid pace, we're starting to coexist with technologies we can no longer fully control or understand. In this race for technological innovation, some fundamental elements around the relationship between nature, human beings and machines are being forgotten. Today, we'll investigate the possibility of analog machines thinking for themselves and the likelihood of them eventually taking control of our thoughts. With that, I'm delighted to welcome our guest speaker today, George Dyson. George is an expert in the history of computing, the development of AI, and the history and prehistory of the American Northwest coast. He's also the author of several books, including Turing's Cathedral, Project Orion, Darwin Among the Machines, and has just released his latest book, Analogia. George, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here in our remote little worlds.
So the book is fascinating, and I think one of the reasons it is fascinating is that it defies categorization. So it touches on a number of different periods in history, has an incredible cast of characters, including Geronimo, Robert Oppenheimer, Catherine the Great, Kurt Gödel. But it begins with a German polymath, Gottfried Leibniz. Can you just let us know, why did you decide on this as the starting point? And how does his story, Gottfried's story or Leibniz's story, inform the rest of the book?
Yes, well, I've been working on this story for a long time, and it was very diffuse, and it refused to sort of crystallize into, a book has to have a beginning, and I didn't have that. But my life took two very opposite directions. I spent most of my life until 25 years ago really working in this world of the Russian colonization of Alaska and the kayaks that the Russians built when they came here. It was a reverse of the normal model of colonization, where the colonizers adopted the indigenous technology rather than the other way around. That fascinated me. So that preoccupied most of my life. And then, thanks to my sister Esther, I sort of got drawn into the world of modern computing that I had seen as a child. And in this beer cooler where I am right now, I wrote a book, Darwin Among the Machines, that took me in that direction. But these two sides of my life were reasonably separate. But the patron saint of digital computing is Leibniz, and who in the 17th century sort of had this vision of digital computing taking over the world. But that was in one compartment. And then in my research in the Russians coming to Alaska, it turned out that the idea for what we remember as the Bering expedition, the expedition to discover whether America and Asia were joined, that idea originated with Leibniz. And so in trying to track that down, it turns out that this originated with Leibniz and Peter the Great deciding to stop drinking alcohol for 8 days and replace alcohol with conversation. And this was one of the conversations was how to take over the world with digital computers, and the other one was to send an expedition to Alaska. So when I found that moment, that's clear. That's the opening scene in this very strange movie.
Yeah, and it's structured around what you think of as four ages of technology. Can you just talk a little for us about what each of those are as you see them, and where we currently are in that progression, that journey?
Yes, of course, divisions are never clear. They're always fuzzy, but and it's dangerous to make generalizations. But in a great generalization, sort of, you have sort of my view of these four ages of technology is the first is the age of hand tools, when we were using technology, but it was done with our own hands. And that's the part where I lived most of my life, is in that first age. And then the second age was when we started making machine tools, which are tools that make other tools. And that brought the Industrial Revolution that sort of, developed in England particularly. And the third age is sort of the age of the digital age, where we started to build not only machines that could be programmed, but machines that could modify their own programs and start to sort of evolve their own programming. And then we got codes, sort of algorithms, that became truly self-reproducing. A code, that's the world, that's why Wired is here. We can make exact copies of digital codes, and those codes can go out and do things. So that's the revolution that I spent many years studying. What is the origins of that third age? And now in living in that age, it seems clear to me we're now entering a fourth age, where sort of analog behavior is coming back among machines, and we're starting to see the emergence of machines that are no longer strictly under programmable control. And that can either be, people like to think of that as frightening, but it also, you can take a more encouraging view. That's sort of nature coming back and reminding us that we cannot control everything.
Right. So there was one sort of part of the book where you describe the technological age that began when, and I'm quoting now, machines began taking the side of nature, and nature began taking the side of machines. Can you just delve into that a little bit and explain what you mean by that?
Yes, well, that's sort of the world. It's the world we live in, and this comes not just from the technology side, but also very much from the biology side. That as we developed sort of our modern Western science, the more detail we look at living things that apparently are completely unexplainable and just have this vital force we call life, we find out that actually the root of that is these molecular machines. Of course, DNA and all the other, we're finding that it's not just nucleic acids, it's proteins, it's all this other stuff that's happening on it. Of course, now we're pushing that hugely forward, trying to solve the current COVID crisis, where we actually have, this is a molecular machine that's causing us all this trouble. It is a system with a finite number of identical, like every molecule of oxygen is exactly the same as every other molecule of oxygen. You put them together, you get something that we're trying to deeply understand. So living things, we see more and more behaving like machines, yet our machines, the internet being, the great example, is something that's so complicated that it starts to exhibit the qualities of living things. So there's nothing really mysterious about that. It's just this convergence from two different directions.
Right. And I guess that tallies with a sentence later in the book where you describe that the intelligence of tomorrow is not going to be human alone, but it's going to be shared with machines and nature. Can you just talk a little bit about that kind of, as you said, I think that kind of, that convergence, that coming together?
Yes, I mean, nature, of course, I'm a huge fan of nature, and one of the heroes of the book is Samuel Butler, who was the prophet who went off alone into the New Zealand wilderness right when Darwin's book came out, and saw that this was all coming, that the machines would start to evolve in a Darwinian way, and wrote brilliantly about that. And I sort of just followed in his footsteps. But those worlds are converging. The question is how we fit in, and what we do about it. And so, and of course, I leave it. I'm not clear one way or the other. You have to make your own sort of choice whether you see that optimistically or pessimistically.
But in your view, are we entering an age when human beings no longer have kind of mastery of machines, as it were?
Yes, and I don't think that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I'm more afraid of we see this debate very clearly now with the debate over autonomous weapons
Yeah.
that think for themselves, and of course, most of the misfortune has been caused by weapons in the hands of people. So weapons in the hands of AI are not necessarily worse, but we have to go into that with our eyes open.
Sure. And how do we go into that with our eyes open? I mean, what kind are you talking about? Kind of like regulation or a better sense of understanding of this, of algorithms of machines and the way that they think or the way that they process information?
Yes. Well, we know that regulation has never worked very well. So
sure.
And huge numbers of people are working in that space. That's not my space at all. But my role is sort of, I'm the Samuel Butler who went off and lived in a treehouse and had these visions of what was going to happen, and I'm coming back from the wilderness, sort of screaming, why can't you see this? That we're in this analog revolution. Because we've been what's interesting is that the period I specialized in, right after World War II, when we developed digital technology, those prophets were taking analog equipment that was left after World War II.
Right.
Much of this work done in the UK, and they were building digital systems, and nobody believed them. Oh, you can't do this. I mean, you can't do this with digital. It's going to break down. And they said, no, it's going to be error correcting, and we're going to solve that problem. And they did, and that absolutely changed the world. And now we're, I think, in a very similar phase where we have all this digital equipment lying around. It's like war surplus. It's free. It's cheap. But almost unconsciously, we're assembling it into analog systems where the complexity and the sort of the intelligence is not in the strictly logical algorithmic intelligence, but in the the way nature computes, not with digital technology, but with nervous systems, and that I think is the profound sort of next step in the future that we sort of are not recognizing the same way we didn't recognize digital at the beginning. It sort of overtook everything before most people realized it was there.
Sure. I mean, one could argue that the proliferation of online conspiracy theories like QAnon is an example of, a system beyond programmable control. It's having, really destabilizing effects on society. Do you think that these sort of, destabilizing effects that machines and algorithms are capable of producing are going to continue to sort of shape society in profound ways, but I guess sometimes positively, sometimes negatively? Or do you think that there's generally a shift towards a positive impact?
Yes, the impacts are both positive and both negative, and I was hugely intrigued when it was Isabella Kaminska in the Financial Times who sort of linked what I was trying to say with QAnon, this sort of recent conspiracy. I think actually the explanation is much simpler, that these conspiracy theories are they're arising because first of all, just a technical problem that people are reading Facebook rather than newspapers, and that is crippling of itself. And then we are human beings. Over our millions of years of evolution, we are hardwired to look for patterns, to kind of look at everything and see the patterns in the animals, patterns in the stars, constellations, and that kind of thing. And the problem with the internet is that it connects everything. So if you're looking for connections as a sort of you can see conspiracies everywhere now, where otherwise they were sort of hidden by the noise, but now you can. This is how QAnon works. It just connects. I mean, everybody's connected. So if you want to connect a group of bad guys, you're gonna find, yes, they are all connected, and you're gonna be terrified, and
Right.
it's a very dangerous thing.
And this you described this kind of almost like blurring of human and machine intelligence. Are we going to get to the point where we don't really sort of almost know the difference between those two things, and maybe there won't be a difference between those two things?
Well, personally, I believe there always will be a difference, and I see my job as helping to maintain the difference. I'm very much strongly on the side of
Right.
But I think people see the problem the wrong way. People are generally, again, a huge generalization, but people are worried about the machines becoming more intelligent. So that's what Samuel Butler was saying.
Mm.
And definitely the machines are becoming more intelligent. I mean, there's no doubt about that anymore, but that's not what we need to worry about. What we need to worry about is becoming less intelligent as humans. And that's the real danger. That's the danger that we could, sort of stop educating our children, or any other number of ways intelligence can sort of devolve. And that to me is the scary thing. Not so much the machines gaining intelligence, but us losing ours. But I don't believe the things that many people are afraid of don't scare me at all. Like, I'm not afraid of bad AI, but I'm terrified of good AI, of sort of the AI that is sold as something that's going to help us, but actually sort of, takes our intelligence away from us.
Right. I guess it's going to be very hard to tell the difference, though, right? That's going to be the big challenge.
Yes, that's what my whole story is about. Is how intelligent people were. I mean, history is full of all these, not just the known figures, but all the unknown figures who survived by their own individual intelligence, and
Yeah.
we need to be very careful not to lose that.
Okay, so we need to go to, we've got a bunch of questions coming in,
Yes.
but just one final question from me, George, if I may. So obviously, you're very well known as a historian of technology, but I'm going to ask you just to kind of look forward a little bit. And how do you think our current conversation could be viewed in 20 or 30 years? Will we have moved forward significantly, or will we still be having these types of conversations about the impact of AI and human agency over them, do you think?
Yes, well, if you say 20 or 30 years, I think in 20 or 30 years, things are going to be completely changed. I mean, we're living in such a sort of phase transition of the way things are going that and so in 20, 30 years, you look back at this, I think we're going to see that we were in this transition, but we weren't quite aware of it at the time. Now, of course, nobody can predict the future. That's the beauty of it. It's, all you can do is sort of, in my view, look at the past and project it somewhat forward. But at this stage, the way things are moving so fast, 20 or 30 years out is completely impossible to predict.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to maybe pick out 2 or 3 questions now, if that's okay with you, George, from some of the people who have kindly joined us this afternoon. One from David Wood, which is at the top of the stack at the moment, and his question is: are there elements of the analog human nervous system which are incapable of being duplicated and improved in computing systems built on silicon?
Yes, in my view, almost all of them. I mean, I think it's this huge misconception to think that computers, that digital computers and natural intelligent systems like brains behave the same way. They operate completely differently. Now, there are certain sort of low-level functions of the brain that can be replicated or duplicated in silicon or digitally, but the higher level functions, I think it's just orders of magnitude more complex, and that believing in that is futile. Then on the other hand, we are seeing some extremely interesting changes in technology where we are actually building, using silicon technology, building actual analog chips that work in a directly analog way rather than simulating it within a digital computer. And that to me is going to change the future as much as the first. We're sort of at the stage of the first 4-bit microprocessor back when, back in the 1960s.
Sure. Another question which has been kind of upvoted on the Q&A here is from Nate Langston, formerly of this parish. Hello, Nate. It's an interesting question. You mentioned colonization earlier on, and Nate's kind of thinking about this in terms of human beings leaving Earth. So obviously we're very excited to think about human beings leaving Earth and exploring the cosmos. But are there compelling arguments, Nate asks, such as those of Martin Rees, that if we were to discover extraterrestrial intelligence, it would likely be an artificial life form that could travel vast distances? And the question is, what's your current view on the hunt for extraterrestrial life, or your belief about how artificial life forms may be searching for us? Interesting.
Yeah, very good question. We could have a whole talk about that. I mean, I've thought about that a great deal. Of course, grew up with that question, and yes, I'm firmly of the belief that we wouldn't necessarily recognize extraterrestrial intelligence if we were looking right at it. It's by definition, it's like AI. It's going to be completely different than us. And yes, I mean, by definition, the forms of life that are most successful in the universe are going to propagate. Are the ones that propagate the fastest, and the ones that learn to propagate at the speed of light will get ahead. And of course, I have my own private, crazy. Everybody has a sort of theory of everything and a theory of extraterrestrial intelligence. But my theory is yes, it's exists already, and we're just not recognizing it. But it's in a very, very different form.
Well, we'd love to hear that theory. Maybe we could do another session at another time. One question from Sheila Heyman. Sheila's asking, interesting one about the energy implications of digital and automated world compared to the natural world. Obviously, in order to run all this compute and all these algorithms, we're using vast resources. Obviously, the natural world is self-balancing. Do you have any thoughts on that in terms of the implications of what will be possible and the relationship between those things?
Yes, also a very good question. I mean, it's interesting how wrong we were, that we thought when we started sort of the mass commercialization of digital technology, oh, this is going to save all this energy. People won't have to print papers, and it's obviously going to be an energy saver. And now it turns out that these enormous server farms all over the world are using a significant percentage of the global energy budget. Is if you graph that in a line, it's going to suck up all the power in the world. So something has to change, and that was very, very unexpected. On the other hand, now the current pandemic crisis we're in, suddenly we have changed behavior, and I didn't fly to London to go to a Wired conference. I just stayed here at home, and so things can change. It's a case of what sort of makes us change, but we definitely are on the path to, I firmly believe we should only use the energy flux that the sun gives us naturally. It's more than enough, and we can use it efficiently. There's no need for anything else. It'll work fine. Solar and wind will do everything. And we now, again, that's the encouraging thing, that we're building these sort of self-optimizing systems that are inevitably going to do that. The problem is sort of the people standing in the way of it, but it's going to, I hope, going to happen.
Yeah, I think.
Most of my story is about the wild world, and I hope much of the world can stay, or return to the wild as well as stay, if not the way it is.
Sure. Final question from an anonymous attendee. Obviously, you write in the book about your experience building and living in a treehouse. Do you think it's, thinking about the world that we live in now, we're so dependent on technology. Is it important, do you think, that we remove ourselves from that world consistently and experience a more kind of, the profound sort of relationship with nature because of that.
Yes, of course, I believe it's important to remember our past. That's why I'm a historian. And I think if you can, I lived for 3 years, 95 feet up in this tree, not from any political. Now people think, oh, you're trying to save the rainforest. I just needed a place to live. I was in Canada. I could do it. But those experiences it's like Samuel Butler going off to New Zealand. They ground us back into the reality we came from. And it's not for everybody, but it's important to maintain that contact with sort of how we got to be human beings and why we are the way we are. And I'm, there's wildness and there's wilderness, and they're sort of two different things. Just like there's science and there's technology, and they're different things. We tend to lump them together, and that's dangerous.
Well, George, many congratulations on the book. It's highly recommended, and thank you for your time today. Really best of luck with the book.
Yes, thank you, and thank Penguin UK for bringing it out.
Absolutely. And thank you to everyone watching the session. If you enjoyed it, please do check out some other in the Wired Foresight series, which includes discussions with Kate Callow on the future of the AI ecosystem, entrepreneur Godfrey Nazareth on innovation through COVID-19. All are available at wired.co.uk. We also have a series of virtual events this autumn. Wired Health Tech is taking place on September the 22nd. We'll explore the innovation and technology driving the future of healthcare and patient care, and our annual business event, Wired Smarter, in October, which will investigate how brands and companies can turn innovation and disruption into strategy. In the meantime, thank you again, George. Thank you for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.